If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Katherine Hansen, your host, and I'm the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, and I'm very happy that you're here with me today. This is the 9th Recovery Stories episode that I've done. I released several of these episodes around the time that I published the second edition of Brain Over Binge in 2022, and in these episodes I interview people about how they let go of binging and other issues with food. I've continued to release the recovery stories from time to time since then, and I'm always very excited to share these episodes because it really shows you how each individual's journey is different. I've said this before on these episodes, but there's something so powerful about hearing someone else's story and the insights that they've had along the way. I've linked all of the other recovery stories in the show description if you want to check them out. I've had people reach out to me to say that they were able to relate to one recovery story in particular that really resonated with them and showed a lot of similarities to their own story. And what's interesting is that I've heard this about nearly all of the Recovery Stories episodes. So I really encourage you to listen and find what's most helpful to you. My guest for this show is Staci B, who has an amazing story of self-acceptance, persistence, and learning how to feel safe. A big part of her journey has been nervous system regulation, which we talk a lot about in today's show. Nervous system regulation is something that people with a history of trauma and highly stressful experiences may be especially interested in learning about and exploring further. Staci is a great example of someone who has overcome so much and is learning to trust herself and what she uniquely needs to continue the journey of healing. Welcome, Staci.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. Your recovery story was actually in the second edition of Brain Over Binge, and I really want to thank you for contributing that. I know you've had a long journey of struggle with food, and I'm hoping you can share some of that today and also what helped you get out of that. So I guess to start at the beginning, how did your eating disorder start?
Well, I'm going to give just a little bit of pushback on that word. Me personally, I hate the word disorder and its pathologization of behavior that was really just created by the mind to survive. My first memory of eating in a way that was designed to soothe me was being 4 or 5. I would sneak into the kitchen at night. And this was back in the 60s. So things were a lot different then in many ways. And I would get baggies because there was no such thing as a Ziploc bag and put the Ritz crackers and saltines in them and stash them in my roll top desk so that when I woke up in the middle of the night, panicky, anxious, whatever, that is what I found to soothe me. I was smart enough to use what was available to me, to find out that those starchy carbohydrates helped with calming me down.
Yeah. And I like that you push back on the word disorder, right? Because as a small child, it's learning, right? You feel a certain way, you do something and it makes you feel better in the moment and your brain learns that. And it's a pleasure process. It's a calming process. And it just encourages you to keep repeating that.
Absolutely. And again, I call it PO for pre-Oprah. But none of this stuff was discussed before she started talking about these kinds of issues on her show. So I was a child being raised in the 60s and 70s. I mean, I graduated from college in 85. So I had done most of my growing before a lot of your readers and viewers were probably even born.
Yeah.
So it was a completely different world then. And what ended up happening was all of those habits and patterns got anchored inside of me so that whenever I didn't feel safe, that's what I did. But I didn't have dots to connect. We are so fortunate in culture today to have people like you who are writing about it, other people who are discussing it and sharing their stories, because I just had shame ladled upon me. That's how society and the microcosm dealt with it. I look back at photos of myself at like the age of 7 or 8, and I'm like, I really wasn't fat. Was I a little heavier than my classmates? Yeah, I was, but I wasn't obese. And yet the way I was treated was like there was seriously something wrong with me.
By your parents, by classmates? Like, can you explain that a little more?
Everybody.
Okay.
Like I remember going to Sears back when there actually was a Sears with my grandmother, and they had a lime green skirt on the mannequin, and I fell in love with it, and I wanted it so badly. And my grandmother was like, "You're too chubby to wear that." Gym class, nightmare. There are people who are in what we consider to be a normal sized body who can't climb a freaking rope. I did what I could to find things that I excelled at, because when you're in a larger body, you constantly need to know your center of balance. So I was really good on the balance beam. I was a pretty good swimmer. There were other things I was good at, but I was also in gym class in high school at the dawn of the President's Physical Fitness Challenge. Thank you, Arnold Schwarzenegger, which did nothing to support a healthy self-esteem in me, because I was in a big open gym with 3 other gym classes going simultaneously, where everybody could see me struggle with the bar to do a chin-up or sit-ups or climb the rope or go out on the track and get time to run 440 yards or try to make a mile. It was humiliating. And again, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I want to use the word safe. What was really going on underneath that shame and humiliation and feeling lonely and isolated was not feeling safe.
Yeah. And like we talked about earlier, your solution to that when you're dysregulated and feeling stressed was to eat. And all the struggle and all of the shame surrounding your weight just created another level of feeling unsafe. And I can only imagine that you turned to food in those moments as well.
Well, what I did was I lived a life in extremes. So I was either overindulging and not monitoring or being aware of anything, or I was depriving myself so badly. I mean, my first diet was like when I was 13 or 14. I've done the 700-calorie diet. When I was in college, the Dolly Parton cabbage soup diet was all the rage. The grapefruit diet did all of that. Weight Watchers, Nutrisystem. When I lived in Manhattan, Robert Atkins was my doctor.
Wow.
Okay. So I did everything. And even in the last 5 years, intermittent fasting, keto, paleo, blah, blah, blah. When you live in a larger body, unless you are in some type of healing journey, and even on the healing journey, it still happens, you default to the let me fix myself.
Yeah. And because that's what the culture teaches. And then, as you know, and that I teach about, once you start doing that, once you start restricting yourself, once you start depriving your body, that's another level of trauma on your body, physical trauma of starvation. And then that can create a drive to binge as well.
Again, it's living in extremes. My intention for 2024 is to find comfort and safety in the middle.
Yeah. And I know that you've made a lot of progress in doing that. So maybe we could go down the path of talking about how you have taken steps to help yourself.
Well, I started with intuitive eating probably about 10 or 11 years ago. I've known of Janine Roth for a long time and had listened to her videos and those kinds of things. But I had a lot of resistance to doing some of the things that she suggested, which is don't watch anything or read anything while you're eating. Set a place for yourself. I live alone. The stunning inability to take care of myself around food really caused that to be difficult for me. I never ate over the sink. That's not, not that there's anything wrong with that. Do what you got to do. Mm-hmm. That was not my thing. But I would eat out of the pot. I wouldn't put it on a plate or a bowl and do a placemat and silverware and a napkin and all that kind of stuff, because there have been so many points in my life where food was just a necessity that I both craved and hated. And so what I have found for myself is that it really has become about my relationship with myself around food. And my journey, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm 100% cured, recovered, healed, whatever word you want to use. I need a hip replacement. So I had a couple of run-ins with the surgeon that did not go well. And I found somebody who said, I really think you ought to try a cortisone shot, Stace. So I did, and they injected a crap ton of cortisone into my body. And all of a sudden, I was in the Wayback Machine, transported to perimenopause, and I was ravenous. I mean, I wanted to eat like every 2 hours and the hot flashes. So that was fun. But it kind of took me off of the track that I've been on for a while now. And so what I feel that it's done is it's taken me to a new level of love and compassion for myself, knowing and trusting that the body wants wholeness, and that's the direction it's going to move in if I can get the hell out of the way. And that has been my challenge over the last couple of weeks because, of course, I opened the closet in my brain and broke out the nunchucks and the whips and the chains and the bats and everything else to beat the crap out of myself. What are you doing? All the progress that you've made, blah, blah, blah. And I finally just said, look, this is where I am. It's where I am. There is something going on in my body that I cannot control. And I don't know about you or other people who have experienced these kinds of situations, but I always felt like I had no discipline. I always felt like I had no willpower. And that's just a load of hogwash. I've written 6 books. I've been caregiver for my mother for 12 years now, and so many other things that require discipline and willpower. So it's not about me not having that. For me in this moment, it's about gentility and compassion and understanding and trusting my intention and that my body will move back toward where I want to be when the chemical reaction that I've been experiencing has dissipated.
Yeah. There's so many things in life that can happen to us physically that do affect our appetite and our desire for food and just our physiology. And I think when we beat ourselves up for that and think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I'm back to square one. That's not really useful. And it is about really stepping back and having that compassion and realizing, hey, something is going on with me right now. And if I can just trust the process and that my body will gravitate back toward wanting that balance, it's a lot easier to get through those difficult times.
Well, the challenge I've had, and I think this is common for any human being, you experience a situation and your brain's like, where have we done this before? Where have we experienced this before? And so it was going back to other situations where I wasn't at the level of awareness I am now, where I wasn't at the level of commitment to my health journey that I am now, and conflating those experiences, making me afraid that I was going to continue down a path I was on 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Because I tried Overeaters Anonymous. Like I said, I did everything. And I was leading a meeting at the New York City Metro OA office. Okay, that's huge. That's really big level of that organization on relationships and intimacy. And then I would go home and have a pizza and a pint of ice cream. And so when this stuff first started happening, my brain dug back into my memory and was like, well, this is just like that. But it's not. And I think that's something really, really important for people to work with, whether it's on their own or with a therapist or a coach or something, is that the situation you are judging your current situation based on a past experience. And that is just, it does nothing for you.
Yeah.
Except make you feel bad.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's good to be aware, like, hey, this eating behavior is not necessarily what I want to be doing, but I'm going to keep it in check. Like, I'm going to have compassion for myself, but also not allow myself to slip down any of those old habit roads.
Well, and sometimes you do. Again, I started at 4 and I'm 60. So, and there were not programs for eating disorders. And like I said, books like the one you've written, there was nothing like that when I was younger. It was all my fault. It was all my lack of ability to have willpower or discipline. There was zero compassion from the medical community or the mental health community around this. And so I've come to understand that for me, and this is only my experience, but that I just have to understand that some of that stuff is embedded in my body at this stage of the game. And again, beating myself up about it instead of being kind and compassionate and continuing to use the tools that I have at my disposal, which I've done, which I didn't do in the situation I was talking about with leading the meeting. I didn't have nervous system regulation tools. I didn't have the kinds of practices that I have in place right now. And I trust that as long as I keep doing that, I'm going to eventually come back into balance. I mean, and again, this is just my journey. I'm not trying to put this on anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I've spent so many years beating myself up, feeling bad about myself, being ashamed of the body I live in, of the limitations that can come with that, of the clothes that were available. I mean, because back in 1970, there was no Shein, there was no Curve, there was no Eloquii, there was none of that. I had double knit polyester pants with seams down the front, or clothes my mom made. So the shame about this has run deep. And it's not like I haven't been in therapy off and on for 25, 30 years. You know what I mean? But I feel that sometimes the body holds on to things for whatever reason. I focus on feeling safe.
Yeah, it seems like you've really just learned to be with yourself and not judge yourself and listen to your body and mind and implement the practices that help you regulate. And I do want to dive more down the nervous system regulation path with you because I know that's been something super helpful and brings us back to the beginning when you were using food as a form of self-regulation.
Right.
So, can you explain what you mean by nervous system regulation and kind of how
Sure.
you've implemented that in your life?
Well, we really have two parts of our brain that run our lives. The limbic brain, lizard brain, which is what says danger, danger, we need to get out of here. But that communicates in feelings and senses, not in language. So a lot of times our prefrontal cortex, our thinking mind, looks around and says, well, there's no tiger, there's no suspicious guy at the ATM, so we're good. And it overrides what the limbic brain is trying to tell you, which is we don't feel safe. And I think one of the most important things that I've realized is that I used a lot of words to describe not feeling safe. Once I dug through those and got beneath it, I realized that it all comes back to feeling safe. So I can say, I don't feel good. I'm irritated. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm this, I'm that. All of that means I don't feel safe right now. Those are all defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms to deal with the not feeling safe, because the awareness isn't there to listen to what the body is actually saying to you, which is we don't feel safe. And the whole process starts with something called the vagus nerve, which is one of 12 cranial nerves in the body. It's the longest one. It runs from the bottom of your skull to the base of your spine. And it is essential in running your parasympathetic nervous system, which controls your breathing, all the autonomic functions, breathing, heart rate, digestion. And so when we get catapulted into survival mode, which is what happens when we don't feel safe, which can either look like fight or flight on the one end, or freeze and fawn being people pleasing out of a drive to feel safe, your nervous system is dysregulated. And what happens is all the energy that your parasympathetic nervous system needs from the vagus nerve is redirected to the sympathetic nervous system so that you can either run away, shut down, do what you need to do to protect yourself in survival mode. And so there are things you can do to stimulate that vagus nerve. And it is a huge topic on the social media platforms right now, especially TikTok and Instagram. And the one thing I would want to caution someone who was interested in learning more about this is to do what you can to start small and stay in the middle. This is a journey of millimeters, not even inches, especially if your nervous system has been dysregulated for a prolonged period of time. So the cold water plunges that everybody's doing right now, right? Because that's a cottage industry nobody saw coming. Cold water plunge tanks to put in your backyard. Who saw that happening? But those can actually be dangerous for someone who has been living in survival mode for a long period of time, as can things like hot yoga or Ashtanga yoga, which is very vigorous. It makes your body feel good in the moment, but ultimately your lizard brain is going to go, yeah, what's this calm thing? This is not familiar, danger, danger. And you're going to put yourself back into survival mode from having done something to take you out of it.
Yeah, it's like we get so used to living in that state and even doing things that theoretically should help and maybe do help in the long term can initially be even more dysregulating.
Absolutely. And not a lot of people are talking about that because it's been a way for people to make money. And that's why when it comes to this, I'll speak about it, but I have a nervous system regulation wiki on my website that there is no charge for. People can go and see books and courses and neuro drill exercises and other suggestions that they can play around with themselves without having to make a commitment to something. Because I feel like there are some charlatans out there. There are some snake oil salespeople who are like, wow, this is a really growing area. Lots of people are interested in this now. I'm going to call myself a somatic energy release coach or a nervous system regulation coach and put all this stuff out there. And so everything that's on my wiki, I've either personally used myself, and maybe it didn't work for me, but I believe the person has integrity. And I think that's just good advice for anybody looking to start something new. Play around, watch some videos, check out some of the sources, on my wiki, and start your own journey. Yeah. Just remember that the longer you've been dysregulated, the tinier the baby steps are that are necessary for your body to begin to feel safe. Because without this, Catherine, I could not be where I am in my relationship with myself and food. I wouldn't be.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm so glad that it's helped you. And I know that it is such a growing field. I mean, it's all based in the polyvagal theory. And I've heard a lot about it recently. And more people are talking about it. Like you said, some people definitely trusted sources, others, maybe not so much. But it's something I think to different extents that everyone can relate to, because we all have moments and days when we do feel so dysregulated. And even though not all of us struggle with actual trauma in our history or maybe some neurodivergence, we all can relate to that feeling of dysregulation. So it definitely seems like something everyone kind of wants to jump on board with, but there is some caution to be had.
Yeah, do your due diligence.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, and I can only speak for myself. My body dysmorphia, because of my issues around food, was huge. And although it has been mitigated, I can't honestly say that I'm completely in touch with my body in the way that I would like to be. And I think there are a lot of people out there, especially fans of yours, who've been experiencing this, who may have been on the struggle bus about this, that may not really know what it feels like to be dysregulated. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people think of fight, flight, freeze, and they think of boxing gloves, sneakers to run away, and being curled up in fetal position with their thumb in their mouth. And they're like, well, I'm not in fetal position with my thumb in my mouth, so I'm good. But there are so many unrecognized signs of survival mode. Are you getting irritated more easily? Are you yelling at somebody who's never going to hear you because they cut you off in traffic? Are you scrolling mindlessly on social media? Are you having trouble making decisions? Are you constantly thinking about what's going to make somebody else happy? Those are all signs that you could be in a dysregulated state.
Yeah.
And again, if you've been in it for a long period of time, those behaviors to you are just normal. And if you don't bring awareness to them, you're not going to have the opportunity to see if there are ways for you to feel different.
Yeah. And we live in a culture where all of that can almost seem normal because there's so much pressure and there's so much like you have to do, go, go, go. You can't take time to breathe. So it can seem like, oh, this is just how I'm supposed to feel. But not really, right?
No, well, again, capitalism, but that's a different podcast, but I even had this happen to me this morning, to be honest with you, because again, I'm processing some trauma that's come up over the last couple of days. It's been hidden away from me for decades. And I'm like, well, the laundry needs to be done. The dishwasher needs to be emptied. I need to be ready to be on this podcast at 12 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. I need to do this. Da, da, da. And I was like, what you need to do is go back and lie in bed and do your neuro drills and listen to the music that soothes your soul that you found on YouTube, which is by a woman named Staci Seba, S-E-B-A, who, again, no remuneration. I'm not getting anything out of this. Recommend her highly. And you need to take 20 minutes, whatever it takes, and trust the rest of it will fall into place. But it's that drive. I mean, I came from the corporate world. I was in media sales in New York City. So I get the hustle. And I get the pressure to do the hustle. Got to make money, got to do this, and even, no matter what you're doing, if you're a stay-at-home mom, that job is filled with a million different pressures. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. What matters is what you tell yourself about what you're doing.
Yeah. And to bring this back to eating, which is what many of my listeners struggle with, is that when you are in such a dysregulated state, it can be harder to tap into what I teach about the higher brain and how
Absolutely.
your prefrontal cortex can control your actions, but if you're so dysregulated, it's much harder to access that.
Right, because that energy, and this may not be medically and biologically correct, but my analogy for it is the energy that you need to listen to your prefrontal cortex and act on what it's saying to you is drained when your vagus nerve is shut down. And again, that just leads to that horrible cycle of beating yourself up. And I should have known better. And I could have done this and I could have done that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't evaluate when you're in a regulated state, but doing it when you're still in that state, that's not helpful. And I think I will be so bold as to say that all issues with substances, whether you want to call them addictions, disorders, whatever label you want to tag on it, all come back to not feeling safe.
And what just popped into my head there is like, I can think of my own experience. And because I started binging out of that survival need for food, and then it became addicting, when I felt the drive for it, when I felt that urge, when I felt such a strong craving, that was in and of itself a dysregulated state. Like my body felt like I needed that. It created all this dysregulation. And the only way I knew to regulate it was to binge. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, I had an experience the other night. I had a very difficult experience getting my taxes done. I won't go into the details, but it really set me into a bad place. Mm-hmm. And I came home and I hadn't eaten dinner yet, and it was 7 or 7:30. And one of the things I do for myself is make sure I have things that are within what I'm comfortable with in my refrigerator. Because I was like, you in danger, girl. If you come home after being out for hours and there's not something that you're okay with to eat that's 5 minutes in the microwave. And I had those things, but I didn't want those things. And, I did some of my nervous system practice again. And then something said to me, you need to co-regulate. You need to call someone and just purge this. And I have a friend who answered the phone, and I explained to him what happened. And he was, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Staci. That's really difficult to deal with. I'm glad I was able to be here for you. And when I hung up the phone 45 minutes later, which ostensibly should have made me twice as hungry as I was when I walked in the door, I was like, I'm just going to have some turkey hot dogs and make a couple of Wassa crisps in the toaster oven with some shredded cheese on it. And that's what I had.
Yeah.
Opposed to using keto bread to make 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because I gave myself that gift. And I've been working at this long enough that I knew that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, it just seems like you've learned your own body and your own nervous system and are getting more in touch with what you need in the moment.
I am. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to be really honest about that. That's just the journey. And I've accepted that this may be this way till the day I die. And there's a part of me that doesn't like that. Do I want to declare myself cured or out of recovery or whatever language people want to use? Absolutely, I do. But what I know is more helpful for me is saying I'm doing my best to fulfill my intentions.
Yeah, and I remember you wrote in the recovery stories something like, when you do have those moments that are challenging for you, it lasts, hours to days rather than like months. And I could be getting your words wrong, but is that true?
That's absolutely true. Okay. And I think about that for myself. I'm like, okay, it's been a couple of weeks since I've had that cortisone shot, but it's been 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been 2 months. It hasn't been 2 years of like blind indulgence of just eating whatever the heck I wanted, whenever I wanted it, and not having any boundaries, because that's also a piece of it for me, is using my inner adult to parent my inner child, which needs to include some boundaries. And again, that's something every parent has given a kid a lollipop to shut them up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just how it works. And so it's not a perfect system. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something those of us who have experienced trauma, who have CPTSD, who might be neurodivergent, which I'm very late to that game, like within the last 2 or 3 years. And that's been a journey of understanding how I've masked and how I've twisted myself into various kinds of pretzels to fit into what I thought other people's perceptions were of me and what they should be, all of which is dysregulating.
Yeah,
you
to try to
know?
be something you're not and try to fit into a certain mold. And I really like your analogy of parenting yourself because
Mhm.
as a small child, when you started doing these behaviors, you didn't have that capacity and that
Nope.
higher brain function. And now you do. And when you see yourself going into those old behaviors, you are able to have that awareness. And I think awareness is a huge piece of this. When we can recognize that we're dysregulated, I think it gives us a lot of power because you know, in these moments, my brain wants to push me in this direction, but
Right,
I know that's not helpful for
right.
me. So if I can recognize the dysregulation, you can better write it out, do the things that actually truly help, because as we know, the harmful behaviors with food makes things worse in the long run.
It absolutely does. Again, I will also say that perfection in that is an unachievable goal for
Oh
me.
yeah. And even perfection I always teach people that perfection in eating overall is not attainable. And in a way, it's more dysregulating as well. Like to
Absolutely.
keep using that word to try to always be perfect and to overthink every bite you take and to always be judging yourself. That's extremely dysregulating.
Extremely dysregulating, demoralizing,
Hmm.
debilitating. It's all the D's.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think, again, the most important lesson I've learned for myself in my relationship with myself as it pertains to eating over the last few years is just to be kind,
Hmm.
you know, do the work. Like when we get off this Zoom, I'm going to make lentils with turkey sausage and vegetables, and I'm going to make some other things so that, again, I have that stuff in the fridge that I enjoy. So that if I come home after being out running around doing whatever, that I've got something that fits the parameters and the boundaries that I've established for me. And I think for me, it's about doing it most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your story is so inspiring for people who did grow up in that time period where this wasn't talked about, where there was not, so much knowledge and where there was so much shame. So I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that too.
Yeah, I mean, it kept me away from the doctors for years.
Yeah.
Because until and I don't remember where I read it. It was years ago. Someone wrote an article and I read it and they're like, you don't have to get on the scale. What? And that was the first empowering thing that I ever did within the context of medicine. And everybody's on their own journey. And I don't know what I'm going to die weighing. I have no idea. This is the body I have right now. And me hating it and me taking action that demonstrates I hate it only hurt me.
Yeah. And it's so much more unhealthy. Like,
Yep.
there's so much out there about stress and dysregulation being unhealthy for your body, right? So, regardless of your weight, the more calm you can bring into your life, the more regulation you can develop, it's only going to help your health.
Absolutely. And it has.
Hmm.
I mean, I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor for a while. I saw what the stress did to my blood sugar
Wow.
in real time.
That's really powerful.
It really is. There are ways out there, there are tools out there if this is something you want to do. Because I think the most important thing is that human beings say they want change all the time. But then when the opportunity for change comes, they're like, not so much.
Yeah.
I can say I want to be a size 6, but am I willing to do everything that would be necessary to do that? Absolutely not.
And would that be even healthy, based on your
Right,
body, your
right,
genetics,
right.
what your body is kind of meant to be? That would probably be a much, much, much less healthy road for you to take.
Absolutely, it would be. And
Hmm.
I'm at a point now, and this is where I reached in my journey. I could no longer force myself or my body to do anything it didn't want to do. And I've been dealing with the trauma stuff from my childhood for decades now. But you add to that the trauma from the neurodivergence I didn't even know I had, and caregiving for an aging parent for over a decade. And that level of stress got me and my body to like, nope. And it's been really interesting to give myself the space and grace around exercise because my body was like, no. And every time I thought I was doing something gentle enough, I still had to back it up. Still had to back it up because I did not feel safe doing that. Somewhere in me, I didn't feel safe. And so I think that's probably my biggest goal, and I don't really like that word, but my biggest intention with myself right now is to feel safe as much as I possibly can.
Yeah. And I think that's where, a lot of the standard dieting, exercise advice, I mean, it goes wrong in a lot of areas, but one way is that it doesn't account for people with trauma. It doesn't account for people whose exercise actually is a trigger for their nervous system.
Mhm.
So it is a very individual journey of just determining what works for you.
Absolutely. And, I was so happy to find your book because I say to myself, neurological junk, like all the time
Yeah.
when it comes to what I want to eat versus what I know would be a good choice for me or a
Yeah.
better choice for me. And I think for me, it's been taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from over there and incorporating it into what works for me because not everything is for everybody.
Yeah, I like that the neurological junk term helps you. I think
Mhm.
it can be useful. I mean, I talk about it in relation to binging and those urges to binge, but it can be useful in a lot of ways. I use it
Absolutely.
myself in times of anxiety. And when I know rationally that I'm safe, but my nervous system is telling me anything but, and I can kind of have that mindset of, okay, that's junk. That's just my nervous system firing. I can ride this out, so it can be something that's cross applicable.
Absolutely, because it was partly what I used in that situation when I talked about my brain going, well, remember when you led those OA meetings and how is this different?
Hmm.
Blah, blah, blah. And it's just residue.
Yeah.
It's just residue ego thoughts, whatever language is works for you, but that's all it is. It's not related to what's happening in this moment. It feels like it is, but it really isn't.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like the residue term as well. Maybe some of the listeners can incorporate that. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share as we wrap up this?
Just space and grace. Give
Love it.
yourself space and grace. If you trust your intention to trust yourself more, especially as it relates to eating and food, you either trust that or you don't. And if you don't, then that's where the work is. What's my intention? If I don't trust that, then I need to figure that out.
Yeah.
I need to deal with that. And then I find the other stuff often falls into place.
That's really helpful. Thank you for ending with that. And I know that you write about this and like you talked about, you share resources. I'll include a link in the show notes
Okay.
to some of the things that you've written. And is there anything else you'd like me to share?
Just the one last thing is that I started an essay series on my Substack called Nervous System Regulation Before and After, because there are a whole lot of didactic tools out there. I mean, Stephen Porges and his son just wrote a book called Our Polyvagal World, which is meant for lay people. It really breaks down the science into easily understandable terms. But I didn't see anybody out there going, this is what happened when I didn't have a nervous system regulation practice, and this is what it looks like now. And so I offer a background, a couple paragraphs, and then I write about what it looked like or would have looked like before I began this journey and what it looks like now. So that people can see in real time, in a real experience, and may be able to relate to the judgment or the snapping or the irritation or those kinds of things that I write about very honestly, especially in my relationship with my mother. Because caregiving, that's, it's a lot of the time. And it just
Yeah.
is. And so being able to lay out there clearly, this is what it looked like before, this is what I look like after. I hope it motivates people to say things can be different if some of the before stuff resonates with them.
Yeah, I think that's great because it gives that real life concrete example.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people don't share that. So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing
I
that.
have no shame. The only way to get rid of shame is to out yourself. Then it has no place to anchor.
It's very inspiring that you've done that, and I hope it inspires, everyone listening to do the same. So thank you so much, Staci, for being here.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening today. I've included Staci's links in the show description, as well as links to all of the other Brain Over Binge resources, including my books, online course, one-on-one coaching, and group coaching. I'd also like to mention that if you want to share your own story in order to inspire others, you can do that at brainoverbinge.com/recovery stories. If you go to that page on my website, you can read so many amazing stories, and you can also scroll to the bottom of the page to find instructions to submit your own story. And when you submit your story, you can also let me know that you may be interested in coming on the podcast as well. Again, that's at brainoverbinge.com/recovery stories, and I've also included that link in the show description. I really appreciate you being here today. As you follow your own unique journey of healing, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.